So welcome everyone. Welcome to the Educators Forum. We're going live on Facebook, and a copy of these recordings can be heard anytime after the event. But we have today with us Cornelius Yusei, all the way from Israel. We have Professor Dr. Felix Amotosho from the University of the Gambia joining us, the political science lecturer from the University of the Gambia. We have Ms. Faustine Wamberi from, who's a policy specialist and works out of DC and a visiting professor as well. I'm joined by Mr. Chris Tupper. He is the Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness at the University of Delaware. So welcome everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Just gonna make some quick adjustments. We have a few people joining us. One of our panelists, Mr. Jacobs, has just joined in. And let me make sure. That our Facebook stream is live. So welcome one and all. We're trying to make sure that we're seen from at the level of Facebook. All right. So there we go. Oh, I hope that's okay. We're recording and we're live. Mr. Jacobs, are you there?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm wonderful, sir. Nice to have you on board.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So we're looking at inequalities in public education across Africa in our schools, and we could have assembled a better collection of professionals to look at the issue from varying perspectives. We have you, of course, head of Liberia's largest public education system. We have a colleague from Israel joining us, Cornelius, Dr. Omotosho from the University of the Gambia, and Ms. Faustine Wamberi, who is a policy analyst and a visiting lecturer here in the DC metro area. We will also have Ms. Bindu Dalo. She's going to be joining us. She's a doctoral mentor in the area of health sciences, health education, but will also provide a perspective on our topic for the day. So welcome everybody. My co-host is Mr. Chris Tupper. He's going to be joining us as well and helping me to direct and guide these conversations. And so Chris, welcome and thanks for joining us. We're going to keep the ball rolling quickly. Let's head straightly to the Gambia. Dr. Omotosho.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome.
Yes, sir. So welcome everybody. This is a 1 hour conversation and we'll try to be as to the point as we can. Again, the idea is that we walk away from this conversation with some actionable recommendations, recommendations that could cross borders, that will help people in the Gambia, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, Ghana, East Africa, down to the south and the north. And so let's get the ball rolling. What, in your perspective, Dr. Omotosho, would your perspective on the topic be? Inequities in public education. We start with you, Doctor.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry for coming on the line a little late. My name is Dr. Darulo. Yes, thanks for having me on the forum. Inequality in education is a huge problem, as we know in Africa, and has been lingering for a long time. So having such conversation today, of course, bring out what we need to know and how we need to fix it. If we know it's there, it's how do we go about it. And seeing everyone coming to the table with their own expertise helps a whole lot, because we never know now that we can have a grip on it and strategize on how to implement functional processes that can bring about results, right? So what do we know about, huh?
Go ahead. You good.
Okay, so what do we know about the topic? I think inequalities in education is a broad area. And I think we all have had a taste of inequality from our various countries and have seen it and continue to see it. Example, where I come from in Liberia is profound. It's a profound area between the have and have not. And climax with that, with the civil war we had over 14 years, I just counted 20-something years anyway, because we're still there. We see children now, we have a huge generation who are coming up with no education, no sound education. And this doesn't paint a broad brush for the entire Africa, because we do have places like Uganda, places like Zambia, places like Ghana, that of course we have inequalities in education because of the poor and the rich, but there are still progress being done. In Liberia, I would come back to, if a country, I'm saying that in a holistic manner here, if a country, its citizen is unable to even put out a dollar a day in the equivalent of a US dollar, which is $200 from what I've read, it's tough to send a child to school on that budget, let alone having the right infrastructure needed to send a child to. And let alone, I think the most important thing here is for us to realize that the grassroots of the problem lies within having the qualification of teachers to carry out these mandates. That's the first thing that needs to be reformed. We need to have a system whereby teachers, and I salute them all the time, but teachers are able to have the right resources needed to make these things happen. We need to hold them accountable, but we need to teach them first. As educators, we need to make sure that they're equipped to carry on the job. And most of the time, they are not. I went to Liberia in 2010, and it was very striking to me because, let me say a little bit of my background. My mom was French, my dad was from Liberia. So most of the time, from a child like this, I was traveling. So it was different for me. But I went to Liberia this time, my parents gone, and I got to this, I was very shocked. I got to this place where they have one bedroom or one room equivalent, and it was a school. So I went over to the school and I asked for the professor. The professor was also a high school dropout. That's where inequality shows us. Okay? So my thing is, it was hard for me to even investigate because it was very vivid. It was hard for me to interview him because there were things I was saying he couldn't understand. So it becomes very paramount. Yeah. Very, very, very paramount. And I applaud you, George, because how do we take this to the diaspora? Would be this one. Inequality. I mean, is that a question?
Yeah.
Any question?
Let's go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dowlo, for your insight. Dr. Omotosha, do you agree that there are issues of inequality in education in Africa, specifically in the Gambia? If so, what are those issues?
Thank you very much for the audience. Like you rightly asked, I actually agree that there are inequalities in education among the various segments in Africa, and particularly in the Gambia, we have these very inequities appearing glaring in the education system of the Gambia. And from my understanding of the system or the entire country and the education system, I could sense poverty, alarming rate of poverty, and culture. In fact, that culture again is linked to the political culture with which the people grew through socialization right from the time of colonialism and till present. And the efforts by the three governments so far, both in the first and the second republics, made to bridge this gap are still not really provided enough panaceas to get this corrected, basically. May I also add that apart from these two factors that I've mentioned, extreme poverty, which has created gaps among the various strata in the society, where only a few that are privileged and could actually afford the cost of education, especially by sending their wards abroad to study after receiving the primary and secondary education, which is available in the country, in order to advance them to the higher level at the tertiary level of education. The seemingly widening gap continuously increase and sustain as a result of the inability of the general populace or the larger populace, especially in the rural areas, where the greater percentage of the population dwells, and who cannot afford this education for their children. So this has created a serious setbacks among the youths, where we have larger population of the youth lacking education and making them to lag behind in the efforts of national development.
Oh, thank you very much.
Hussein, from a policy perspective, you've worked in the environment for a while. You're a visiting lecturer. What is your take on, as far as the policy perspective is concerned? What are those issues? Dr. Omoto basically pointed to issues of poverty. From a policy perspective, what's your take on the issue?
Thank you. Thanks, George and Christopher, for hosting us. Thanks.
And please let us know regionally where you're from.
Sure. I hope my volume is good and that you can all hear me. Thank you. Just very delighted to be here for this really important conversation. I'm Faustine and I'm from Kenya. I'm currently based here in Washington, DC, where I work in the global development policy space. So the issue around education obviously is one of those that is dear to me. And I'm so glad that you convened us at this particular time. And from a policy perspective, I think I just want to frame this first of all from, the recognition that education for all continues to garner, not just in Africa, but across the world. Education is one of the goals that we have all signed up to as a global community. But then, as you rightly frame this conversation, what does it take to transform this commitment into action, right? And I just want to echo what Dr. Bendu and other speaker have already said, that inequities are manifesting in really blatant ways across regions, within countries, and even within regions in countries. Dr. Bendu talks about the conflict aspect, and I think that's one area that, for the most part, we have neglected or we give lip service to. What does setting up a good education system in a conflict-affected setting look like? Versus the blanket approaches and policies that we implement to address some of these education needs. And I also just want to dig a little deeper into what has been said about the rural aspect and acknowledging the massive rural-urban divide that exists in much of Africa. I mean, I'm from Kenya, and I'm pretty sure that I speak for other African countries as well, that the rural-urban divide is great, and that's one big factor that's driving inequities as we see. And then we have to ask ourselves, why are our rural areas poor, when in fact 80% of Africa's population lives in rural areas? It's a no-brainer that, you know, poverty is contributing to the inequities in education that we see. If you are, and then there are other issues that are compounded by that. If you are poor, if you're coming from a poor household, if you're female, if you are from a, you know, conflict affected or some kind of stability, so we're talking gender, we're talking geography and income, or poverty, as the speaker has said, chances are your, you know, kind of fate is determined from a very young age in terms of how far you get with education. And I think another striking thing that we ought to be paying attention to, even as we implement the Sustainable Development Goals, that we've seen an increase in enrollment rates. But there's also a sobering fact that a large percentage of Africa's kids who are actually in school by 4th and 5th grades do not have the basic, are not attaining the basic skills. That's reading and writing and math. And that gets to an issue of access, but also quality. And again, to Dr. Bendu's very good point at the beginning, if you have teachers who are not equipped, how do we expect kids to learn? And then you have to ask the question, why are the teachers not equipped?
Yeah.
What are the priorities? Are we funding these areas and schools enough? Are we prioritizing the education needs of children? So we are failing children from both a policy, but also from grammatic, and there's so much in between. And one other thing we could think of, as a lot of teachers would prefer to teach in an urban school versus a rural school, perhaps even incentives, perhaps better pay to incentivize well-trained teachers to stay in rural areas and train children. And in addition to that, a whole other needs like sanitation. We know that a lot of girls, particularly adolescents, drop out of school mainly because there's no sanitation facilities, like toilets, water, and all of that. So I think there's a lot to unpack there, and perhaps I can stop there for now and continue when.
Thank you so much, Christina. We'll go to Cornelius, then to Mr. Jacobs.
Cornelius, you are out there too. Can you talk to us about the issue?
Yeah, thank you so much. Greetings from the state of Israel. I'm a Liberian and currently doing some theological studies in Israel. At the same time, I hold an MPhil degree in educational administration and management with emphasis in supervision. The issue under discussion, as some of the speakers have mentioned, is a clear-cut incident that in Africa today we still experience a huge gap of inequality, a better put equity in our educational system. Two of the speakers have already mentioned the issue of having a state that is not stable, a state that have faced conflicts. And you know, when conflict comes, it creates a bigger gap again in the strata in terms of the classification of the citizen. And so the civil rights will create inequality. And as the research that was done by the UNDP in 2017, renowned Nigerian economists, one or do studies say that the inequality in the educational system can be better linked to the massive corruption that is formed within government, wherein which people who work in government, their children are given an opportunity to go to other country to have education. And therein, you find a facility within the country full. I conducted a study in Liberia in 2017. And in 2017, I noticed that many of our schools are not equipped in terms of facilities. They do not have the adequate facilities to run basic primary and secondary schools. So as a result, what happened? There's a big discrepancy between a child who's schooled in a public school and a child who's schooled in a private school. And you notice that the one who's schooled in a private school many times perform more than those who schooled in public school. Why? Dr. Benu mentioned about the idea that for unqualified teachers in our educational system, and that is across Africa. I have witnessed also in Nigeria in terms of the urban and rural discrepancy, and people receive poorer attention those in the rural areas, and you find that the Mrs. Faustina said you find that large of the concentration of the population is within the rural area, and in terms of access and quality is very poor. And so also income, the income level of those parents are to increase the level of inequality that exists amongst students. And at the end of the day, you find out that people or the elites, their children will benefit more.
All right, Chris?
Thank you very much. Mr. Jacobs, you run the largest school system in Liberia. And I'm sure you will agree that the issue of gender disparity in terms of inequity is very dear and very hard to most of Africa. So what can you say specifically regarding the issue of gender inequity in your own school system?
Yeah, I have not conducted much research in that area, but as radio reporters continue to say it, and I continue to follow the media within in Liberia, you notice that there is a huge gap between boys and girls when it comes to education in Liberia. So you find out that girls are more, one of the speakers said, because of poor toiletry facility, are more to drop out of school than boys. So you find out more guys are making their way to the university than girls. And so there's a need to consider looking at the way that girls can be supported, especially from the basic level. Because at the basic level, they need certain things to keep them in school. And so when those things are not there, you find out they reach to non grade, as some people will say it in the JSA 3 at the end of the day, and they drop out of school. So they cannot make it to high school. So in order to have the ladies or girls remain in school, basic facility have to be provided for them. And then they will stay in school, and we believe that the drop-off rate will be low when it comes to gender, especially in regards to girls.
So
Okay, can we?
Actually, that question was for me, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
But before you come in, Mr. Jacobs, a comment from one of our observers says that inequality exists, be it in private schools or public sector. Even in the urban area, there are manifestations of inequity that I observe. And so, Mr. Jacobs, Chris, you want to position?
I think I was trying to lay the premise for Adolphus because you run the largest public school system in Liberia, and I wanted you to tie in specifically on the issue of gender and the girls and the issues that they face in terms of inequity in the system. So can you please speak to that issue?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for having me. The issues cannot be overemphasized. The previous speakers touched most part of that, but within the urban system that I in charge of, the disparity between boys and girls is huge, obviously. Part of the reason for that, these countries, Liberia, I was privileged to taught in Liberia Sierra Leone, and Guinea. So I understand a little bit about these traditional society situation. The school year runs August, September to June and of each year as the school year runs. And I think somewhere in February around there, these for Liberia, there is this society called Bono Society thing. Women are trained, young girls are trained to be women earlier. During that time of the month, they go into the forest to get training and all of that. We notice in the rural areas where girls will go for training. They leave school. Schools are empty during that time of young girls who go into the society to come get trained and things like that. They have already disadvantaged by their location in Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, where I taught in those countries. There are inaccessible areas. Most of the areas in the rural are not developed. In fact, we term them rural because they're places where cars don't even get to. So the access to quality is kind of frustrating. Young girls are easily taught womanhood earlier, so they focus on that part and not come to school. So you have that. That's traditional. In the city, in the urban, in Monrovia, in Freetown and Conakry, it's a little difference there. It's not as huge as it is in the rural areas of those countries. In the city, they're a little bit because not much of the girls leave to go into the forest to get the training. That's part of that. And again, because of everyone is traditionally based, the focus, even if you're in the city, it kind of affects the opportunity to aspire. But inequality, I think other previous speakers talk about that. It cross-cut from teacher quality, obviously. Teacher lack motivation. Not everybody that has a degree can teach, like it's being presumed over the place. Our argument over the years is that if we are giving people license to drive, lawyers have license, nurses have license, teachers prepare nurses and doctors. Why are teachers not licensed to teach? People are supposed to be qualified to teach. We can't just put anyone in the classroom to teach because you have a degree. In some cases, some people even have the degree, but they're still teaching. And they're teaching and preparing doctors and nurses. And those doctors and nurses will have to be licensed to operate or to do their jobs. And but we're not emphasizing the people who are teaching the doctors and nurses to be qualified to teach. That's sad in those countries. So teacher quality is very key to this process. And that stems out of the fact that the lack of motivation themselves, the poorly paid, then it comes to integrity issue. You know, of course, in disadvantaged communities, people exploit the other, every profession, you have the what we will stand bad apples. People solicit different things in exchange for student passing grades. So the girls again stem out in this process. That affect the gender part because girls are usually abused. They either giving their bodies for in exchange of grades, or they're subjected to some labor or something else just to get ahead. And so they're usually taken advantage of. We've witnessed that in these different countries, and I've been personally involved in addressing some of those issues over the years. So yeah, there's so much there to talk about. I wrote an article on what you call contemporary issues in education. All of those things come in, where the government is responsible, where educators are responsible, parents themselves are responsible, teachers themselves are responsible, even students themselves lack the motivation where they don't have the support from their parents. Most of the students are self-raised. To mind you, you have this disparity where girls are usually thrown out of school because they get impregnated. And the boy who pregnant these girls, or the men who involved in these things, continue their schooling while the girls are thrown out. Mm-hmm. So we had to break our school system down in a way to accommodate girls who were even pregnant, to come to extension schools in the evenings just to accommodate them. So now we block all those loopholes. So it's helping in the urban area. I don't know what's happening in the rural areas, but in the urban setting, we'll be able to address these issues in a large extent. So yeah, cross country, again, I'm better positioned to know that because again, from my background with Sierra Leone, I've been taught that for years, in Guinea and then Liberia as itself. So I have those clear understanding of what's going on in those areas.
Can I chip in something on this nexus of gender parity and education inequities?
Go ahead, sir.
Right. Actually, the nexus of gender parity and education inequities in Africa is underpinned by the culture that we are endemic into in Africa generally. And as you know, Africa, our culture is almost the same. It's just in countries by countries, you see some little differences. And if I can flash to the society where I am here in the Gambia as a resident educator and lecturer in the University of the Gambia, I can see that what is really responsible for this gender parity is the inadequacy created in the school system for the girls not to be sent to school or to be deprived that right to education, basically because the society feels that the girls do not need this education, and what they need is to be married out or to be married away. And before being married away, they should do chunks work or homework like maids and what have you for their families and whomever they give them to serve before releasing them for marriage. So inadvertently, they suffer that setbacks of having the opportunity, like their male counterparts, to be adequately enrolled. However, when Yahya Jammeh came to power in the Gambia, kudos to his government when he discovered this problem and found a solution to it by coming up with an education / social policy of girl child education, where girls are now, the enrollments of girls in schools was now increased in double forms and with associated free tuition fees and other benefits attached to it in order to encourage them. Vis-a-vis the discouragement given to the parents to stop the attitude of marrying these girls out at their very unripe ages. This is a very serious case. And then the second aspect of it is the attitude of the political class, which is also, creating serious problem for the enrollment, as the political elite, tend to give more time to the children of the privileged than the children of the underprivileged, as I can say, or so to speak. So this is a serious problem, and the issue is still raging in the society here, despite that fact, until the new policy now made under this current government, the new strategic policy on education from year 2017 to 2030 for sustainable educational growth towards national development.
Thanks, Dr. Omotosho. I think we want to move now to talking a little bit about solutions and talk about recommendations, what can be done to help to stem the issues of inequity and how we can be able to solve the problem. We can spend all of our time because we know the problem is there. So from a practical standpoint, let's start with Dr. Dawolo. Can you tell us what practical things we can do or governments can do to begin to minimize or eliminate the issues of inequity?
Thanks.
Number one, there must be discipline. Oh, am I still talking or someone else?
Someone else, please.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. That's very good. It's a very good gap analysis, actually, for what we just collectively have mentioned here. It's important to say the least, to be practical in bringing solutions to this devastating problem we have. We have to do three things. One, we have to do some grassroots education when it comes to parents. Parents have to understand that education is paramount in this day and time we live in. It has to be done at a very grassroots level. And that encompasses of culture. Culture is a comprehensive approach to this. One would be parents have to have keen understanding of what it takes to have education propelled through when it comes to the generation. Because if not, we have a lost generation. We have a very good generation, but lost. Two, if we must have a very good and sound education that our children can compete on every level, we must understand, as I said earlier, that we need to have quality as opposed to quantity. We need to have quality educators who will be held accountable, but at the same time, I suppose, as saying teachers, we have three things that goes with teachers, and that's accountability, that's responsibility, and that reputability. I know it's a lot of adjectives going around. When we have these things, we will be able to, now we have solved the problem with the parents and understand, of course, hopefully, the importance of education, that transition to the teachers. Rural area, urban area, city, you name it. When we have good educators who can transcend this information to the children, of course, we are getting somewhere. But that doesn't take the place of the overall, which is the administration. Administration have to be held accountable, very much accountable. In Liberia, I'll say this, in Liberia, it is not there. We see a huge gap. I hold the educators in Liberia accountable, especially when it comes from the hierarchy down, but hierarchy first. Because if we have, every time I hear these things, the first thing that comes to mind is, who's the education minister in Liberia? What is he doing? And then follows where everything goes to the president, but it's supposed to start, the buck starts with the educator minister. What is he doing? Because with him, transition comes. So if we can have these models in place, and we have these accountability measures in place, we have to have a feedback mechanism where when we leave from the rural area, every rural area is supposed to have sound education. How can that be done if we don't have a sound educational awareness going on? That's the first thing. So if these three measures, as I said again, we have to have the parents who are very educated, you don't have to be very educated to understand what's going on. You have to be aware. You have to be aware. If a parent is in the rural, what's his name said, rural area, can understand the importance of education, come on. My husband is from Liberia. And just a quick story on this particular issue. I heard way before I came into this world, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they had a concept, they had a model where from a family, there has to be someone who has to go to school, period. It was a mandate that someone go to school. So they had to come to the family and say, hey, because education is paramount in this day and time, we need to have someone from your family member that has to go to school. And why? It's because when this person go to school, they'll be able to take care of you guys better. They'll be able to intervene with other things that you guys may need. And therefore, life becomes better, internationally, locally, and all between.
Thank
And
you,
actually, huh?
Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. Faustina, how can we hold public administrators accountable to addressing the issues that we've so eloquently highlighted?
How can we hold lawmakers accountable?
Yeah, that's a question for Ms. Maberi. Faustina?
Sure. No, thanks. And I think just great again to piggyback on what Dr. Bindu just said, that, you know, kind of we need both a grassroots and grassroots approach. And for all the reasons that have been stated, why we need to mobilize from the grassroots, educating parents and teachers.
That's correct.
But also holding leaders accountable. I mean, the kind of policies that are affected. Think about something like a budget. A budget is something we should hold as a moral document that should give us the power to hold our decision makers accountable in terms of how resources are allocated. Why would we have schools in urban areas receiving more resources than those in rural areas, when in fact, majority of the population in Africa's region is in rural areas? So that's one area. And there are some practical things in a couple of countries already across sectors. There are tools like citizen scorecards that are beginning to really surface in ways that help us really track what our governments are how money is being allocated to that. And I think the other thing, as we talk about quality, is also just asking the question, is our curriculum fit for purpose? I think that's also another area where you find discrepancies in terms of the school you go to. You may all graduate at the same level, but you find students from one region faring better and have better employability rates than others. So there's just so much in between there to do. One last thing I'll say, and this is, I think, overarching. There's so much excitement in Africa about urbanization, and that's great. It's important for Africa's industrialization and economic growth. But for as long as we continue to neglect rural areas in general, on health, on education, on agriculture, on nutrition, we have to be thinking of these consequences of poor education on Africa's long-term trajectory of ending poverty. So I think it's so important that I will talk about education, not in a siloed way, but this is the pathway out of Africa's cycle of poverty and desire to transform economies and lives. Let's stop there.
All right, we have Ms. Anastasia Simmons. She's a renowned educator, based here, but had practiced her trade and does go back and forth, helping to advance the quality of reading instructors across Liberia. Ms. Simmons, you asked a question? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, good morning to all. First of all, I want to start off with saying that parents do understand what education is. But I think our problem here is this. Before I get to our problem, the parents in the rural areas, they are very, very successful with informal education, such as the Senate Society, River Bush, and all of that. So if those parents are successful at doing those things, why is it that we who want to bring informal education are not trying to study what the things that they have done that have made them so successful? That is where we have our disconnect, the formal and the informal. As I see it, the informal is very, very successful. So we need to revisit our policies. What are these policies that we have? We cannot just throw these people things outside. We can just say, oh, okay, it's time for formal education, you know, outside with informal. And as I go into the rural parts, as I see that man, that woman walking with the stuff on her head, and the man there with just his cutlass going to the farm, you know, I'm asking myself, how is it that these people have been doing this and they're very successful? What is it that we highly educated people, as I'm looking here today, what is it that we are not doing? Why is it that we are not connecting? Because the minute we can connect, we can have our people can buy in, they can become stakeholders, then we will be more successful. As I go into the rural parts, we have schools where the teacher is barely 6th grade, barely completed 6th grade. And the villagers in there are paying him by working on his farm. Since he doesn't get his salary regularly from the ministry, the villagers are paying him to make his farm, grow his crops and everything. And at some point, they even gave their children to be his spouse. So the real thing is that parents do understand what education is, but what kind of education do you want them to have? So that's why I think we should try to connect the dots right there. If we can connect it, convince the parents that, okay, education will get you so and so place, and not just come and just shove it down their throats. Let parents become a part of the decision making. We've seen where Liberia has a lot of programs in place. Every day people come in and bring in different programs, but we don't implement those programs. Those programs, we don't, all the evaluations and stuff, we don't go back and say, oh, what did we accomplish? What are lessons to be learned? No, sometimes they bring people to the States for conferences. They go back, they don't write reports. There are no reports to inform our practice. So how now are we going to blame our people in the interior? We send our teachers up there, they have nowhere to live. They have to, depend on the villagers to give them a little room. And while they are there, paycheck isn't coming in. Like some time ago, I visited back Bush Arlington. I met a teacher. And talking from one thing to the other, he said, if I didn't have my wife, nobody would know that I am a man. This woman stays in the interior, in the city. She sells, and then that's how she supports her husband, because she wants her husband to be, that respectable person. And years ago, the ministry they did a report. I'm sure Dr. Tokba, you're familiar with it, where they found out that there were more men in teaching, in education, than there were women. So as I'm going from one little village to the other, I can understand why there are more men teachers than there are women.
Can we make a transition here a little quickly? We're running short on time, and we want to make sure we hear a little bit more from the other panelists before we get out. I'm going to move this now to Mr. Jacobs. Can you talk to us a little bit about what practical steps you are taking on your end to address the issues of inequity, and what more can we do?
Well, first, the government, we've been, from the government angle, we're trying to have more budget allocation for education. Our law calls for about 25% of the budget, and up to this point, we are thinking about 13% of the national budget to education. So we are fully underfunded in that sense. And that's been going on for many years. So that's part one. The government is looking into increasing funding to education. And what we're looking at also is that early childhood education has been an issue for us. We haven't put more resource in the bottom of the education ladder. We always focus on the top of it, it's the bottom. School feeding has been a very critical part of our process as well, what we're working on, because we learned that our kids don't study, they don't learn on empty stomach. Kids don't come to school anymore because our schools are not attractive. When we were going to school back then, Chris, you know that there was school feeding. Kids, where people went to school on time, they were to school on time, they participated in the learning process because there were food. And now these days, there are no food in the schools. Schools are not attractive. So the kids not motivated, they don't even come to school. And if they do come, they're not participating, they want to get out. So we're trying to address that portion of the school feeding, and there are a lot of work being done now by other agencies who have come into the country. And then the teacher quality issue, we keep stressing, to have teacher training. We have curriculum. Teachers not been taught to use the curriculum. That's another issue. And so those are things that we're working on now. It's kind of hard, but it's there. Then recently we'll be advocating for the academic crimes court, separately to deal with academic matters, we'll deal with educational crimes where there is some where integrity issue comes in and all of that stuff. So we are fighting for the separate court to deal with all academic crimes, whether it's solicitation for student advancement in any form, shape, or manner, any form of solicitation. The court will be able to deal with that. Now, the previous speaker talked about the PTA, the parents' involvement. We have a very strong PTA now. Before then, parents were not part of our decision-making process, but parents are more involved. And another thing she touched on, I wanted to say, why she said it was successful in the interior and not successful in the urban with parents' involvement. In the interior setting, parents see the teachers as Lord and gospel. So it was the home, and the school teaming up for the children betterment. In the city, the home and the school not teaming up. They're doing different things. The school is there to educate. When the kids get home, the parents don't even follow up on children education as in the interior. The parents are more engaged in the interior. So they come to the children's school, everything the teacher say. The teacher says one thing at home, the children is reflected back in the home. Teachers were leading the way, parents are there to support. In the city, it's a total different story. The parents doing their own thing, the teachers doing their own thing. You know, so the teachers, for example, kids take assignment home, the kids take the assignment home, parents not following up on these assignments. So everybody disconnect. But when in a village, when the children get home and the parents say, have you opened your book yet? You have not read. Are you reading your book? Are you studying? Why haven't you seen book? And the parents put more emphasis in the interior. And the city is a whole different thing. The kids are used for money making, income, and all the different stuff. So not too much attention there. So I can see the actual disconnect. So on our front, those are the things we're working on: school feeding, early childhood education, and the increasing funding for education in Liberia, and the academic crime code and total parent involvement in our process and the teacher quality. Those are things we're working on right now. It's a long road, but it's hard. The political will not there usually from people in authority to see that we increase the budget in education. As you know, there's a global partnership for education, the GPE. They're requiring countries to tap their budget at 20%. Then the GPE will qualify for GPE funding if you can match up. They do match up grants. So you do 40% of your 20% of your national budget, then you have certain amount of money. But countries are struggling to get to that 20%. They don't see the need to give that 20% of the national budget to education alone as a sector. I don't know why is that difficult, but that's what the struggle is.
Thank you.
Okay.
George, may I ask a question, please?
Yes, ma'am.
So he's brought a very good point out, and I'm sorry that I didn't get the whole story from Ms. Simmons. But to you, Jacob, what is the feedback mechanism do you guys have in there? So is it, what's the short and long-term goal in another aspect?
Short and long-term goal in terms of what? About
in terms of, because you've listed a lot of good things. You guys are setting up a system for accountability, for a court. You're setting up grassroots to help these people have good nutrition. Very proud of it. You have what? So how are you getting these feedbacks? What are your measuring tool to get your feedback? If you have, are you looking at when you feed a child coming to school, is it after the semester you get a feedback from what's going on, or are you waiting to the end of the? What is the feedback? She mentioned some empowerment that happens in Africa quite a lot.
Jacob, before you come in, I think the question, and we got to wrap up in a few minutes. We got 5 more minutes, but in terms of the set and established goals that you have, what strategic partnerships are you establishing to assist you in the attainment of those goals?
Well, we have our educational partners. So we have the UNESCO, UNICEF, eBase World Mission, USAID. We have the World Bank. We have all of these other agencies that come in. But again, these are program driven. We do our programs and the partners help us in achieving those goals. So they'll be able to help us in terms of our curriculum. They'll be able to help us in working on teacher quality, and all of these things are supported by partners' efforts. The measuring goal about school feeding, for example, to make school attractive again, to keep kids in school, because the one thing to get them in school is another thing to retain them in school.
That's correct.
So you have a situation where we try breakfast in the morning at 7:30, kids are supposed to be in school by 8. And when you do 7:30, schools are packed. When you just try the elementary school, kids come to school in record number. To keep them there, you got to serve lunch around 11:30. So we see that kind of impact. And then they participate in the learning. Where there is no feeding when the kids come to school, many kids that don't have food the day prior, when they get there in the morning, they're weak. They're leaning, first graders, second graders are all leaning on the desk and the table. You ask them what happened, they will tell you they're hungry. They're just laying there. They're not participating. They're not asking questions. They're not doing any activity. Now, a well-fed teacher is standing in that room is teaching. He's very active, very annoyed that kids are getting their head bowed down on the desk. Why the kids are not asking questions, why they're all leaning and looking sick. But he's well-fed. He or she is well-fed from home, but the kids are not. So we've done our assessment, and we'll be able to determine that school feeding is very critical to the learning process and participation of the student as a whole. So again, parents have to be supportive in this process, and that's what we do. Everything we do is informed by data. So we do our survey and we do random sampling in cases to get some feedback before we take action. So yeah, that's how we do.
That's good. Yep. It seems to be that's a continuous feedback. That's good.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much. Cornelius, can you talk to us quickly about what solutions you think we can, practical things we can do to help to minimize the process?
Yes, I'm happy that one of the speakers emphasized on that of the early childhood education. I think we need to strengthen that sector. It's very significant for the educational growth of Liberia. And I'm also thinking about strengthening the education at the district level through direct funding, because we have various districts in Liberia. And so rather than waiting for at the central level to send the budget and tell them how to spend it, they should do it on the grassroots level. And continuous supervision. I think there's a key aspect that many of our schools are not supervised, so you don't even know what is going on in the school. And you have limited information, and also the upgrading our educational facilities. And it's very, very cardinal to this process when the facilities are upgraded. Think about the library, think about the lab facilities. These are core issues to help to at least improve our student performance within the school. Coupled with adequate training of our teachers. Yeah, those are key and practical things I think we can do to save the situations.
All right, so let's quickly move to Faustina. Solutions. I know you talked about the budget and what have you.
I think I just wanted to, I was echoing the point around the rural-urban divide, and I think to all the points that have already been raised here, that we need sort of a synergy between rural and urban development. And so we can't just be supportive of the urbanization of Africa. We cannot assume that we will all move to urban areas and just be fine. Let us invest in rural areas. And in order to do that, again, just ensuring that we mobilize and that citizens are paying attention to budgets, because I think that is where our weakest link lies. We hear proclamations, we hear budgets read, but then in terms of transparency and accountability of that, we are falling far short. And then I think one other aspect, I think we've already talked about this, that a lot of teachers will obviously prefer to teach in an urban school versus a rural school. So again, just like we're doing with the kids, we could offer some incentives to teachers in rural areas that would, provide some additional morale for them to stay and teach in rural areas, because we need good quality education there as well.
Okay, so we've reached the 12 o'clock mark. Thanks to everybody. We want to be respectful of the time of our panelists. We thank you all for showing up. Dr. Omotosho, could you in a minute give us your wrap up on the solution?
Well, thank you very much. I can see that there is need for us to visit our African model of education that will help to eliminate all the recurring effects of colonial legacies that we have really addicted ourselves to in Africa generally, especially on the part of the political leadership that controls the political power and who are expected to use this political power to really give more to education through budgeting and other strict measures that can encourage quality education, not just education, but quality education, and help us to bridge the gap of the gender inequities in the system. In addition to this is the discipline in the political structure of our governance to actually see what is important between the nexus of education and democracy. As democracy is the preferred form of government now, and whereby people, exercise this freedom instinct and sees it as a necessity for everyone to decide what is best for him or her. So we are there. The government should see that there is need for the youth to sensitize themselves, okay, to the very importance of education for themselves and using that to contribute to national development. Indeed, there is need for the political will on the part of the leadership and the elite to give more to education and eliminate all forms of corruption. Thank you.
On behalf of the organizers of the forum, we'd like to very heartily say thanks to all of you who've shown up to serve as our panelists: Christina, Bendu, Cornelius, Adolphus, Ms. Simmons, thanks for coming. Dr. Omatosha, thank you so much for showing up. My co-host, Chris, we did a wonderful job today. We're looking forward, hopefully sometime next week when we can work it into Mr. Jacobs' schedule to have an exclusive squarely on MCSS, where it is, where it's come from, where it is, and where is it headed. Look a little deeper into how together we can help MCSS, because part of the goal of this exercise is to ensure that public education becomes a lot more competitive than it is today. When we were growing up, public education was highly competitive. It's not the case today, and we have to work together with our concerted effort to get us back to that level, so that the economics behind that is the more competitive public education is, the less stress it is on parents across the country, to provide and deliver education to their kids. So thank you all once again. It's 12:04. Participants, you're definitely gonna get a copy of the recording for yourselves and for your networks. As we say, whenever we have these events, please dig into your networks, come on board, and let's do justice to education in Africa. This is we're hoping to make it a Pan-African platform where Africans can begin to learn from Africans once more. So thank you again. Thank you for showing up and showing out. We thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Be
All
well.
the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome, everyone.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Hey, Chris.